Welcome back to another episode of the ByteTalk podcast. Today we have with us Bruno Passos. We're very excited to have this conversation. Bruno, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. It's just about the end of the working day in Europe. Pretty good.
Yeah,
Tired but good.
this is
Awesome.
our first interview with someone who is located in Europe. Last time we woke up 7 a.m. So I'm glad that we were able to do this around lunchtime for us. but
Nice.
but we're super excited, man, to have you here. I would love to just like understand what are you working on right now? What are the things that you're interested on? So how's everything? How's life?
Yeah. Life is good. So what am I working on? So job title wise, not that that matters. I essentially lead or help lead the developer experience at booking.com. I'm sure we get the chance to talk more, but we are reinventing the way we do software, the experience behind writing software at Booking, a lot of cultural change in terms of culture of development, and that's essentially what I spend the majority of my day doing.
That's awesome. And what are the biggest challenges around that? Because I feel like DX is such a big subject that some people would treat that mostly as an internal project or internal group of folks that are dedicated to improve the experience of employees. But then there's also the external factor. I know that Booking has a lot of open source projects too. So is there any component of that? How does that work?
Yeah. So what I normally say in-house is developer experience is one of those super nice topics that don't hold any business logic, right? So like there is no way why we shouldn't be talking about it. There is no reason why we shouldn't be talking about it. It doesn't have anything we should be hiding.
Uh-huh.
And we should be talking. We should be comparing experiences, and should be comparing the ways we do things in order to eventually have a better world of developer experience overall, no matter where you work. That's my sort of like fluffy dream that I strive to get to. But at Booking, I think the challenges that we have is our approach towards development was very much on the A/B testing side of things. Let's have an idea or a hypothesis, as we call, and let's iterate as much as we can in order to get to a positive outcome to that hypothesis. And that is what brought the company to where we are today. Incredibly cosmopolitan, super international, known worldwide. But that also brings us some challenges, which is the technical debt. It's everything is done with the iterative process in mind, and that means that we all know the code that we write today is the legacy tomorrow if you don't maintain it. And so that's the challenge that we have today: is changing, is trying to keep the gold of that experimentation culture, but changing the approach in which we write code to have a more quality driven approach, and in a way where we build a culture that is prone to quality, and therefore people feeling fulfilled, happy, and empowered about what they're doing, and ultimately the user having a code that is reliable, or a piece of software that is reliable, that is performance and resilient, right, in the end, and less buggy. So that's essentially the biggest challenge today: is how do we change that culture, and how do we go about maintaining some of the gold that we found, or that we created as a company earlier, in a new sort of approach. That's the main challenge.
For your time at Booking, I know you spent some time at Booking and then you left and came back, and we can probably talk about that. But I'm curious, from you working in developer experience, is that something that Booking was already like super on board with? There was, sponsorship or investment or whatever on that initiative, and you're coming in and fulfilling a role in that? Or is that something that you had to kind of sell to Booking to invest in this as a, and even like you said at the beginning, it can be hard to justify sometimes to the commercial side of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. So today, I'm super happy to say that we are incredibly invested in developer experience and improving that. Uh, um, I think, truth be told, we were always invested in developer experience. We were just invested in a different approach towards developer experience, right? So, for instance, if you go back 5 years ago, we were very interested in developers understanding the statistical power of experimentation, right? In developers understanding how to write like code that is encapsulated into an experiment flag, how you develop features inside of that experimentation flag, when to stop, when to start, how to measure. So the developer experience was very tailored towards experimentation, which is incredibly fascinating, right? To be able to optimize a website or an experience like booking.com's it gets to a point where you saturate that quite a bit. And yet you find sort of like streams of experimentations that you can just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so that is in itself is a super sort of enticing developer experience. But as I mentioned before, that also adds a bunch of code on top of code, or like legacy code that you don't use anymore, but it's there, which eventually, so if you can imagine like queries to databases that you didn't clean up, but it's still there somehow, or understanding a code base. You come in to your first day onboarding at a company, and you have a huge monolith to deal with, or to understand what code is still performing, what code is still running, what code is running to a part of the population, right? Like that, there's all sorts of dimensions that you do that. Now you fast forward that to over 2,000 developers, and then you have
Yeah.
an ecosystem. Let's go, right?
It's a nice, yeah, it's a nice word.
So the company, we're basically trying to change things in a way, like I mentioned before, where we still have the experimentation, where we still apply that statistical power, that the hypothesis sort of like line where you go and iterate, but do that with things like automated testing in place, right? Do that in a way where we can have a service-oriented architecture approach to things, and where like defining the areas of the code base and the website where you do experiments, and the others that you treat as, I don't know, heart surgery, right? When you go in it, you go with care and sort of like precision. And so that's where the developer experience is sort of like morphing and changing towards, but it's still keeping that value that we love and care in our culture. And to me, that's the challenge here is culturally speaking, you want to change the culture of development, and you want to change the approach in which you write the code, but you want to keep intact the values that we know of from a company perspective, right? At least that's my view as sort of leading that transformation.
And that's definitely the harder part, right? Like the culture piece, man, it's so tricky.
Yeah.
And I remember like when I visited you and I went to the booking.com office, I was so surprised, Johnny, like just by talking to everybody and listening to this way of developing software, that was a completely new concept for me, where everything was under feature flags. And I feel like nowadays this is a pretty common concept, but back then I don't think that was so spread as it is right now. And also everything needs to be proven, so it's not like, oh, I have an idea, I think this is going to be really cool. Like, no, you have to actually experiment with different versions, and there's no sentiment around the decision making process. Whatever is performing better is better, so that was really interesting to me. But
you also remove personal opinions, right? It's not like you can come to work and have a culture where you have a boss telling you where you should be going. It's like everybody's equal, which is something that we strive a lot to remove, the sort of like the corporate hierarchy, and add a sort of like where anybody can bring an idea and we can test that. whether it's from a copy perspective, whether it's from a back-end development perspective, whether it's from an animation perspective in the front end. It doesn't matter. They're all ideas that can be tested.
So,
And how? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, just a question about that. Like, thinking of maybe, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but a traditional like product management workflow of like there's some sort of input, whether it's from customers or internal stakeholders, something to build a backlog, and then you're sifting through that, prioritizing features, and then that gets somehow handed off to some sort of brainstorming, design, and then to engineering, and that whole workflow. So could you walk through, based on that as a baseline, what does it look like then with this A/B testing format?
Yeah, I mean, we are super user focused. Teams are very much they deal like if they were startups, right? So we are self-sufficient in a way where we can have a crew of development and research and content to be able to help you get an idea from concept to completion, and that involves a huge amount of research. It can come from a hypothesis that anybody can bring, like I mentioned before, to a line of thinking that we started a while back and that we are iterating to get there. But ultimately, when each team has their approach to deal with things at Booking, really. But if I can, generically speaking, we would have a backlog based on you and I being part of a team and having that sense of ownership, which we appreciate a lot, of people coming and having a problem they're trying to solve and they own that problem. So that's one way to populate a backlog, and that's one way to start like an N+1 sort of like approach to hypothesis. And there's also ways from like a user research perspective. We are trying to an idea or a different market that we see a possibility in that, and we can very quickly spin prototypes and put in front of a user and in user labs that we have in house. I mean, this is all pre-corona, right? Where people could fly and we could observe the ways they interact with that particular idea or product that we have in mind, or prototype, and from that, again, many hypotheses will come out of that and populate the backlog and be where a team would spend their time sort of trying to tap onto an idea or a hypothesis and go to a full-fledged sort of completion.
Interesting.
I don't know if that answers your questions, but that's essentially how backlogs are very fluid and very open.
Yeah. So you almost, it sounds like one of the big changes is, instead of taking a feature that's like a full package where you have a problem and then you also design the solution and then you build the solution and then you release it into the wild, you kind of like stay at the problem phase almost all the way through, and you leave yourself open for experimentation and iteration, even like post-release. So, okay, we're gonna like try these two paths to solve this problem, and then we're gonna release, and then we have metrics to measure which one's doing better, and then okay, we'll take that, and then we'll find new problems, and keep piecing out. But you almost stay in the problem phase longer, maybe than, at least in my experience, like a lot of organizations seem to want to get to the solution phase really quickly and then build the solution rather than just living in the problem.
Yeah, 100%. And there's also an element that to me was a sort of like a discovery when I joined Booking is the idea of going through like from a concept all the way to completion, and by the time you get to completion, the web has changed so much that you can go back to the beginning of the idea again.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, whoa, from that problem point of view where you spend so long trying to discover and to go deeper and to understand the user behavior, and then you get to the end of that and you think you're finished, and it's like, well, but hang on a minute, maybe now animations or drop shadows is not the thing anymore, or like now we're going with a different like flat design, for instance. Maybe we should try the idea again from a different perspective because we know more. And then the world is open again to that entire sort of experience. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And how is like, I think this is a great example that you just gave, because like there's some changes that aren't necessarily not gonna change the sales numbers, but they're gonna change the perception of the product. So how like do you guys use that instrumentation to make decisions when there's something that maybe, or like is there any case where you don't need a number to prove that one is better than the other, or like okay, we're doing a redesign, flat design is better than design with shadows or material, whatever it is. Like how do you guys make decisions like that?
That's a very good question, Zeno. So this is part of the culture shift and change, right? So the world inside of booking was going so fast in terms of iteration and implementation that you would always, like, as part of that culture before was so strong that you would do it based on a metric or a set of metrics that you want to see improving, that you just keep on going. That's your idea of success, right? You it's a number, it's a metric. It's very sort of like product metric driven approach. But you can also imagine that as you go down into like implementing components, for instance, or a way to be able to spin up UI faster. So you have a set of components that are a date picker or a form, or and you go deeper into that. Once you have established that set of components and you have aligned as a team or as a horizontal organization, you now want to experiment across the component, and now you've changed completely the way to look into this, because you're not anymore changing the color of a button, right? You're changing an experience that starts somewhere and finishes down the funnel. And so the experience changes there as well, and then you start to, instead of becoming more inquisitive about where things are going, you start to get more opinionated about the experience that you want to put across. Right. And now the product starts changing. The culture of development changes and started in a way from there where like this stack at Booking was very monolithic. You had a very back end heavy stack that outputted a front end, like a string to the front end, and you did magic with languages or technologies built in house. And that was super agile, but also added a complexity. For example, if you hire someone, you would have to get that person to learn that particular set of technologies in order to be able to be productive, right? And so one of the things that we've done was break that monolithic stack in a part of our product where instead of just a back-end monolithic stack, we now added a front-end framework, a reactive framework, which we decided for that particular part of the product to go with Vue.js, and then you would add a server-side rendering framework. At the time, we experimented with Node, and then you isolated the backend into endpoints that you can go back and rewrite into services later. And so this is in the space of 2.5 years, if that makes sense. And now your experience of development changed fundamentally, because you are now like people are not developing in a template that have business logic, client-side logic, back-end logic all in one place. Now you have components, you have things split into micro front ends, and the way it gets served to the consumer is different. And then the point that I brought about the fact that you now become precious about how you're going to break that experience and that component. When you do, you also need to talk to the components that are expecting a level of experience. You know, and it's fascinating to see how, and if you compare to, I happen to have an architecture background, and when I say architecture, I mean building architecture background. When you compare this to other industries where things take 20, 30, 50 years to change a concept or a paradigm, to now in 2 years we've changed the way we develop code, and now we require different skills. We require our community to reinvent themselves almost, right? Like now that we have that set of components, be it on the front end or on the back end in the form of endpoints, you become precious in how you change that, right? And if you're the owner of that, because now you need an owner, like how do you govern that? And so the idea of being encapsulated into a feature is not anymore everything. Right now, you need tests, you need integrations, you need a way to develop locally without depending on everything else, but then have a way to integrate later. And then that's when the pyramid of tests starts to kind of like come into the culture, and the whole thing just changes completely. I find all of that incredibly fascinating, and seeing the culture of development changing, seeing the people get excited about other things, right? But it's still having that incredible focus on the product, you know. But now you're focusing on a bigger problem to solve instead of a small experimentation problem. But we don't want the experimentation to go away, so how do you keep that alive, and so on and so forth.
Wow.
It's super interesting.
Yeah. It's and even like I'm imagining there's challenges as you break it up into components. You have to like keep strong contracts between those components, because if you're doing testing on one component and that another component is relying on that, you have to keep things consistent enough. There has to be this agreement between all of the layers that they're all gonna, receive and communicate and everything the same way. But then you also want to be able to adapt and to try new things. So I would imagine that's really difficult to know the boundaries of what you can experiment with without, and obviously this is where testing and integration tests and everything come in. But still, as we also know, testing is never 100%, right? You can't have 100% confidence. But is that a challenge as well, or have you guys figured that out?
Yeah. I mean, figure that out it's a very loaded and strong term, and I think one of the things that we have in our culture that I find super valuable is being humble, right? Like, I don't think you're ever gonna hear anybody from Booking say we figured it out. I think the idea is we are testing. There are things that I think we got it for now, but later might not work. But I think the thing that works for us right now is to bring the concept of design systems, right? What is the common language that we want to put out to our users, and that becomes the contract. At least in the front end side of things, that's how it works. And because you're changing. The paradigm is shifting so much that when you build that design system, you almost have to be careful to not become too precious towards it, right? Because you spend so long to change, to add consistency, that when you do get that, you don't want to change that, and you have to allow for that to change as well. You have to get to a point where you go, okay, but now instead of changing, like I mentioned, from a button perspective or a field only perspective, you try to change that from an experience perspective. But one of the things that I find super interesting is that now you have any discipline inside of front end having an input on that. So for instance, people become more, instead of more generalistic, they become more specialists in the topics that they're doing, whether it's on the consumer side, whether it's on the partner or hotel side. You see the content or copy community becoming super strong and super having ideas or lines of experimentations that they want to follow that is super complete, and then people have to research more, not only about the user perspective but also their crafts, and again, it's a culture that changes, that makes people become more specialists in their fields, and you see a lot more engagement, you see a lot more passion being brought to the equation, right? At least for a different perspective. And the reason I'm saying that is because there isn't one thing that keeps that contract going. I think it's several elements that keeps it stable.
Yeah, you mentioned how having that architecture degree, just drawing
I knew you were gonna go there.
differences. Yeah, I actually I was looking at your just doing some research on your past, and I saw that yesterday that you were I think around 2002 2006, between that era you went to architecture school. So how was that experience, and how do you have anything that you learned that you can bring now to your present day and draw parallels between those two worlds?
Yeah, so architecture is in my life almost on a daily basis. So I most of my days I start when I sit in front of my computer is by literally spending 20 to 30 minutes just clearing my mind about like looking at architecture trends and
Wow, really?
and sort of like interior and how what is going on, right? I'm a very I'm a very doodly person, and like, there are things that you can see that comes from like an architecture background that I spend a lot of time. It's almost became the way I think and the way ideas come into my mind. I'm very, very visual. And so that's certainly something that I remember. One of the first classes that I went to in the architecture school was to learn how to draw parallel lines, and you literally had to do thousands of them. You just literally freehand draw parallel lines to be able to be able to learn to sketch, because I think the beauty of architecture is on the sketching part of things. And so the reason I'm saying that is because one of the most valuable moments that I have with the team or with the people I work with is on the sketching part of things. I think that there is no faster way to get to a potential idea than to literally be in front of a whiteboard with a pen, drawing boxes and writing things and trying to get to a common sense just by throwing ideas. And I think architecture is exactly the same thing. You find that the hand-drawn sort of like sketch is more valuable than the actual finished product, right? Because that's where the core, the essence of the idea is. I don't know if it answers the question, but it comes with me all the time.
Do you find that challenging during the pandemic? Like, I at least for me, just like getting in a room, whiteboarding. I mean, there's amazing tools like Miro that has taken whiteboarding virtually really well, and I think like part of it is even just us adopting to that. You know, like the tools are there, we can do most of it, but for someone who really likes to physically doodle or lay out thoughts and brainstorm, how has that been?
It's been a massive challenge. I remember when the whole discovering the pandemic and where was that going to take us and where do you work from, and like, hey, stay at home for a week, let's see where that goes. Stay at home for a month and let's see where that goes. Hey, let's not have a day to go back to the office. And I remember the first time that it came to me, I remember going to the office and the folks at Booking were like, hey, we don't think it's safe, right? That there's an element here of like question mark that we don't know if it's safe. Everybody go home until further notice and let's reinvent ourselves to work from home. And I remember the next day waking up and heading to, I don't know where, the kitchen table, right? Like, and you just stand in front of the computer. I remember standing in front of the computer and just thinking for like, I'd like to say for about an hour and going, I work for people. Like my main motivation is people, right? Going to the office and seeing the people you work with. I think that's what drawn me to being DevX as well, is that your customers are right in front of you, right? For me, it was super, super challenge. I'd say the sketching part, you can carry on doing. Even though people are not seeing, you can take a picture and you can send a picture. You can so that to me wasn't as hard. And then when I got to think of that, I think I was already clever in the sense of like, how do you work from home? It was more not having the motivation of who I work for. And then eventually that hit me pretty hard, because you then sat in front of a computer. Yeah, you're talking to people, but you don't have that human interaction anymore. You don't have that thing of like, hey, do you want to grab a coffee? I have 5 minutes. You know,
you exchange some ideas and talk about something you never would have started a call for, right?
To me, that was super challenging. And then you start questioning, okay, what I'm doing today, you know, and you start, I don't know how you guys do it, but like you start trying things. You start going like, okay, I'm going to make a list. I'm going to make a list on Post-it notes. And then you feel silly about doing that, right? It's like the idea of journaling or writing on a diary. If you have never done it, when you do it, it looks really silly. It looks like a waste of time, but actually super important. It has a lot of benefits, but you don't know until you try and you try and you try, and then you start seeing the benefits of that. And that period of trying and adaptation for me was I had a massive knock on my confidence, on my purpose. I do believe that, especially as you become senior in an organization, it's incredibly important that you have that sense of purpose. What are you here for? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And then hopefully that matches with the problem that the company is trying to solve, and that's like a match made in heaven, right? And Zeno, I say that, but like this is one of the things that stayed with me the most about our friendship is you have that super apparent. When you try to solve a problem, you have it's apparent. Twitter will know, Instagram will know, right? And I love that about you, and this is something that stayed with me a bunch from our interactions is that sense of purpose, and I lost that completely in the first I would say the first 6 months of working from home, and you're just taking one day after the other, which means the way I describe it is like you're a boat without sails or engine, and you just go wherever the tides want to take, which is an enemy the biggest enemy to production, to being productive, to being efficient, right? So it's super challenging. How did you guys find?
I think like we all, like Johnny and I struggled that so much because our lives were around people too. And one thing that I really love about like how Johnny would approach life at the office is that like he would create this culture around the coffee machine, and then everybody will go there and socialize, and like we had our lunches. So from like one day to the other, we completely lost everything. And I feel like that was a discovery phase for everybody, because from one sense, now you have like all that time in your hand, you're like pretty excited because you can have lunch with your spouse and some like opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have, but then at the same time, you know, you don't have that relationship and that connection with your coworkers, because that's part of how you get things done too, right? Like sometimes you like nudge a developer in a direction like, hey, can you like do this a favor, and then that's like an experiment that you're working on, and then you're proving an idea, but then you lose all that at the same time. So I feel like I wish I had an answer, because I'm still figuring it out, to be honest.
And you know, in ways, adds a lot more meetings to your calendar than you would before, because some decisions you just make over the coffee machine or over lunch or right, or just turning around behind you. I mean, we are at Booking where we have so many offices, even across Amsterdam, that it's hard to do that. But you could pick up the bike and go somewhere, and all of a sudden your day-to-day would become healthier as well, because not only you're cycling, but you're breaking from work, you having that moment of that's gone. Like the best part of my day was heading to work and coming back by bike, right? I mean, I had the unique chance to take Zeno on a inside of a basket on a bike across Amsterdam. I mean, that was refreshing, wasn't it, Zeno?
On the back.
That was
in the front.
in the front.
Yeah. And that is refreshing. I mean, going to work on a bike is like you spend 20 minutes cycling. We're not gonna even mention exercise here. You are thinking about, you're getting your head in gear. If you haven't had a coffee yet, you have the wind on your face. You start the day wired, and in the same pace, or when you go home and you're on a bike, you break away from the day. You decompress, right? It's a moment for you to forget the problems, or even forget the problem you're trying to solve in a healthy way.
Yeah.
All of that was gone. You know, man, that was super hard.
Yeah. I feel there's weird pieces of like debt to it too, because even talking to people who are remote for, you know, their whole career or years before the pandemic, most of them say, oh, that wasn't working from home. That wasn't remote work. That wasn't what any other time. That's not what it looked like. You know, you weren't confined to your home. You weren't stuck. You weren't immediately like ripped away from the office and not allowed to work with your, you know, in physical space and stuff like that. And so it's not a great representation of what remote work can be, I think. But at the same time, at least my experience with it was, you know, it's like getting out alone, and like every month there's like this interest building up on it, and like, yeah, you can still make the payments and you're okay, you know, like you're not like going bankrupt, you're not going under, but there's this cost that keeps building up. And even imagining like if you don't pay the interest every month and then a year later or 2 years later, there's this weird cost that comes, right? Oh, my loan grew by 10% or 20%. Like, oh man, and now I need to pay that back too. And I feel like that's kind of what happened with relationships and even productivity, right? Where all those little ideas, all those little conversations, all that watching someone else accomplish a task faster than you can, and you realizing there's a hotkey, or like even those tiny things, all is spreading, you know, productivity and enhancing the experience and everything. And I kind of wonder when, I know personally every kind of 6 months I felt a new level of that. Like now I feel it on a different way than I did the first 6 months. I feel it in a deeper way, you know, not necessarily in a worse way, but just in another level. So I don't know what the future holds. Like even myself, I chose to go remote during the pandemic. So now who cares if the pandemic is here or not? I'm still remote, you know? So, but I'm curious what will change, you know, regular trips to the office and things like that starts to build back what we had.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think from a people's perspective and like leading teams of teams, I can't help but worry about the people that don't have the resilience or the mental health intact enough to go through that.
Yep.
Right. And when like I said, I go to the office for the people. I really enjoy the collaboration and in different levels, seeing people accomplishing a task, but also seeing people going from an inexperienced dev to like a lead developer that learned to be influential, to be communicative, to be good, better at their craft. And now you don't have that checkpoint anymore. Like how are they going to do? And that is a debt that I accumulate as well. Right? Like, how am I going to support such and such? Oh, I haven't heard from person X in like 2 months. And when you go into like, whoa, how is that person doing? You know, and you go and try to figure out. It's super hard. The debt is, I don't think we can imagine yet, or we can quantify where we're going to be psychologically. You know, we changed completely, dramatically the way we work, and I don't think any company will go full time into offices anymore. Right?
Yeah,
because we learn to be productive.
Yeah.
Or when someone will stop working, right? Like when is the moment that you just call it time? You know.
I love that concept of depth because if you think from a relationship perspective, you know, maybe that's the reason why there's so many people leaving their jobs, because it comes to a point where the depth is so high, it's so crazy that you can't recover from that. And then that's when you have like those disruption moments, and then people ended up leaving. But yeah, man, like I wish there was a way, you know, to reproduce that entire ecosystem, but it's completely impossible. Like you can have those virtual systems and you can have some attempts. You do one thing here, you try another thing here, but at the end of the day,
you're taking the jobs of so a company like Booking, where we have several offices and we want to maintain a pattern in between those offices. How do you collaborate? What is the noise? What is the sort of like the places where you collaborate, the places where you meet? You now took an entire department that focused solely on that, and now you have to figure that out on a day-to-day from home for yourself and for others, right? Because when you lead a bigger organization, you also have to figure that one out. So for instance, show at some point there's a dedicated office for me, and that's super amazing. But what about the person that doesn't have that has to work from a kitchen table, where now the ergonomics are not thrown out the window, right? The developer is working with the table up high. How do you do that? And I'm lucky enough to work for a brilliant company that sort of worries about that on a daily basis. And like imagine the task of shipping everybody a chair. Because now you have that amount of chairs in the office that you can't just throw away, and you don't know when you're going to go back. So you need to figure out a way to reuse that.
Yeah,
How do you ship that to the developers? And if someone decides to
Monitors.
not work to the
Yeah.
company anymore, how do you get that
to get it
back?
back.
You know,
Yeah.
the dynamics change completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the disparity between like the entry level folks that are probably maybe not getting enough they're not getting enough payment from the company to like build a a shed to be their office, or even invest in like a new desk or a new chair or those kind of things. And you have the senior folks that have plenty to do that kind of thing. So you even start to get disparity between the workers if the company doesn't provide everything. But then if the company provides everything, then you have all those other logistical issues
Yeah.
of managing all that. And then it's really difficult. Yeah.
Super tough. Yeah. One of the ways that we found, like the people department at Booking found, is to give a budget for people to spend on their peripherals or the things that they want to make their life more comfortable, but also provide chairs and desks and again, like you said, we're lucky enough to work for places like that, but there are other startups that can't afford that, right? It's tough. You have to do what you have to do, and tough.
Yeah.
And like I know that you have been working for Booking now, maybe a total of like 6 to 7 years, but there was a hiatus. Yeah, hiatus moment over there. So how was that moment where like you were living in the Netherlands and then you decided, hey, I'm going to Canada. I'm gonna work for Shopify. How was that experience?
That was awesome. Yeah. So, no, that was brilliant. So at the time in my career, I wanted to go more technical. I wanted to be more hands-on. And Shopify came at the right time. We started talking, and it was for like a lead developer role in the company, and I couldn't say no. The shift in paradigms of development was completely different, and I needed to experience that. Right. So like, how do you go from a like a loose way of developing code to a more structured, opinionated way of developing code and product in general? This is not coupled to code only at all. Is to the product in a way, and I couldn't say no to that, and I went, and I think it was one of the most awesome professional experiences I've had in my life. I think Shopify is one of the most amazing companies out there, doing some phenomenal stuff with an amazing leadership. And I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah,
You're gonna
I feel
ask me
like
why I came back.
no, it's curious because like when you move companies, there's so many new things that you have to adapt, right? You have new coworkers, new like power dynamics between people, so much that you like new tools. But what I found fascinating is how you can see different changes in how like you approach software as a whole. Like how do we release? What's our strategy there? How do we approach security? How do we approach performance? How do we approach accessibility?
Yeah.
And each company will have a different approach. And I feel like that's one of the most interesting parts, because if you are just excited about software as a craft, then looking at those things is pretty interesting. And I imagine that was something that was super cool for you, right?
100%. I think one of the biggest discoveries that I had as a leader of people, but also a person who is super passionate about tech, is how coupled a company culture is to the language, to the main language they develop on. How coupled that is, right? So I'll give an example. Shopify is a Ruby shop, right? And Ruby on Rails is super opinionated about how you do things, right? Is there are several ways to get to the same place in development in general, but Ruby is very opinionated on how you write tests. When you create a repository, it comes with all of that as a given, with ways for you to, here is how you do it, here is what good looks like. And that propagates throughout the entire company culture, I found. On the flip side, you have Booking that had Perl as their main backend language, and Perl is super loose, right? There's lots of ways. You're free to decide how you're going to do it. In the beginning, I compared a lot with like the iOS experience versus the Android experience, right? You can flip an application for an Android phone, or at least you could, very simple and very easy. But Apple had a very specific way in how they wanted the applications packaged. And you can see the experience in the company throughout the entire company, from the person who is working on preparing the most amazing lunch to the most senior engineer. At least that's my opinion, and how I found that to be. And now, how you, once you internalize all of that, how do you then start strategizing on company culture? Where do you change things? Like Shopify is the engineering inside of that company is to an excellence that is amazing to see, right? That if you go to another company that doesn't have that strict way of doing things, they would say, oh, but that is going to create a bottleneck on the product, or that's going to delay me on or make things go slower, when in reality it doesn't. It gives people more depth in the problem they're trying to solve. Right, like for example, a hackathon at Shopify, we would be hacking on a 3D printer for a scale to see how much it would cost for someone to ship a product.
Wow.
Right? So instead of hacking on a new tool that you're gonna use to create a chat, you would be hacking on the thing that actually, the problem that you're trying to move the needle on. And that, to me, that was the most magical thing to learn and to see. At the time, Shopify wasn't remote, and living in Canada was super far from my family. Yeah. It wasn't. It was the thing that weighed the most for me to leave. I still think everybody needs to work at Shopify at some point, because it's phenomenal. Their approach to product and like focus on the problem you're trying to solve, and everything else will come as a consequence. We know the product is viable, right? And so if we do it with excellence and passion, we're gonna get money will come, and so on and so forth. And I super appreciate that. And that's what made me come back. My heart is super blue as well. Zane, you know me. I wear the t-shirt, right, wherever I work, and I knew that Booking was trying to change their way of develop their software, and I thought, hang on a minute, I learned a bunch of stuff, and I think I could be super valuable there as well. And that was my biggest motivation to come back.
That's cool that you got that contrast, and you can appreciate both. They both serve a purpose. They both are successful. Both are very successful approaches, but you're able to see maybe even what you prefer, or what caters to your personality, or the way you like to experiment or build, and then also be able to appreciate the other side and find ways to learn from that and to grow from that. That's a cool experience.
Yeah. And this is when I say about DevX being an open topic that doesn't hold business logic into it, is that we should be comparing those. We should be talking, right? We should be, as a community, we should be spending time brainstorming not how we make products better for the company, but rather how do we make developers' lives more efficient and easier and more fulfilling, for them to be empowered to fall in love with that problem that they're trying to solve. I think it's a super interesting topic. I'm looking forward to seeing what Zeno does from a community perspective.
Yeah, no, man. And
He's always
know,
up
like,
to something.
He's always up to something, yes.
Yeah. I have some plans stored around that area for sure. And man, I feel like right now, maybe you have worked in like 4 different countries already, and you experience like so many different cultures and things like that. So how was all these changes on a personal level? Like how were you able to handle those? And do you think like where you are right now with all that move and all those changes?
It's an interesting question. I've always been interested in living abroad, right? I used to teach English from an early age. It was one of my first jobs. I was lucky enough to have parents that really forced me to learn English as a language from very young. And it was like a Cambridge affiliate school in Brazil that I could then take certifications and progress to a point where I think I was 15, 16, and I was teaching classes of like certified classes, and what that gave me was the ability to meet people from all over the world, or from England mainly, but from English speaking countries, where they used to come to do conversation club in Brazil and stay for 6 months. We got to host some folks in our house, and so that gave me made me super interested in living in the UK and understanding how the culture there was. And that's what brought me to England in the first place. But the point I'm trying to make is that I was always very interested in that, in experiencing different cultures. And I don't think I was ever born, and my friends in Brazil would say, you're never born to live in one place. Although super in love with Holland now, and I don't think I want to go anywhere anytime soon. But the impact that has on you is the positive impact is the ability to deal with several levels of communication from different people of different backgrounds. To me, that was hard in the beginning, but super fulfilling as you go forward, right? Like, you learn how to tailor your communication in ways that is valuable. That, I don't know, Zeno, when you go back to Brazil and go back to that immersed. Brazil is a very big country, so people tend to stay within in their holidays and go to beach houses or country houses rather than going abroad. Although in a way it's different from when I was a child now. But what that means is that your culture is very strong, like Brazilian culture. And when you go and try to have a conversation, or your mind, like my mind shifts all over the place from that, tailoring that conversation point of view. I love that. I think a negative impact of this is being away from family, is having kids and seeing them growing away from their grandparents, and to me, that is something that I don't know if I've already seen, if I have seen all the impact that has had in my life up until now. I think there's more to come. I dread that a little bit, but it is what it is.
Is there is there any way to compensate for that? You know, like the fact that maybe they don't have cousins that are like super close to them, or grandparents, like, what do you try to do? Is there anything that you like? Oh, I don't know if there's any way to replace that.
Is that post-corona, during corona, or pre-corona?
All of those combined.
It's an interesting question, because it also impacts when you're trying to find a job. And this I'm gonna open this a little bit from an advice perspective for folks that are trying to live in another country and work in another country. You should take the package that you're receiving, and you should take that into consideration as well. The fact that you're away from family, and the fact that you're away from the loved ones on a daily basis or a weekly basis, has to be compensated in different forms. So for instance, I probably go out for dinners more than I would if I lived in Brazil, right? Because you have to compensate that social aspect. You have to compensate the entertainment aspect. I don't know how that is for you guys. I know, does that ring true?
Totally.
Right.
Really, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So you have to take those things into consideration. Trips back home, those cost a fortune, right? And you have to take that into consideration. Unfortunately, the majority of the things that you have to compensate comes down to spending and needing more money in order to fulfill that, or replace that energy. But I would say, Zeno, is screen time with grandparents, and it's going back home as much as possible to have that contact, right? My parents do make a huge effort to come here as well and spend some time with us. But all of that is thrown out of the window with Corona, I must say. The last time I went to Brazil was 3 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, man.
It's tough.
It's tough. But I really appreciate that you are thoughtful about those things, you know, like, you know the struggles, but you are looking for solutions. And sometimes you can't provide the same feeling, but you're obviously benefiting from other aspects of that experience too. So it is what it is.
Friends become more family, right, as well. The people you work with become, it's a different spin on work relationships and things like that.
Cool. Well, Bruno, we finish up every episode with the same question, and that is, what's something on your desk, could be software or hardware, that is getting you excited about coming back to your desk?
At work or coming back to my desk every day here?
No, your desk right now. Yeah.
Right. Woo. I was tempted to say my guitars, but that's not work related.
No, that's okay.
Saying that as I work.
That totally works.
It becomes a doodle sort of like tool as well, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
every 5 minutes you noodle a bit. No, the thing that comes back that makes me come back to my desk every day is the amount of post-it notes of things to do, and I removed before this talk, but there were things stuck on the wall, and these are things that brings your priority back to your head every time you come into the office, and what I would love to remind everybody is just pick a problem you want to fall in love to fixing, and that brings you back to work every day, right?
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ByteTalk podcast. You can subscribe to be notified of our weekly episodes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. See you next week.